Okay, so this is the start of the 4th week of work on the low gravity racer spaceship project. Last week I made the main engine, added a ton of wires and details on it. I have added some surface detail to the body, and I also made the side thrusters. But my goal for this week is to actually add some thrusters also on the front of the spaceship, one on each wing, so that the spaceship can kind of turn and change its direction. And I also want to add some thrusters on the bottom so that the spaceship can kind of hop upwards and keep going forward. If I get the chance this week, I also want to work on the cockpit. As you can see, I already made a paper mock-up of the pilot right there just to check if I had enough space for it, and it is looking good. I decided to begin this week of work by tackling what was left unfinished from the past week, the side thrusters on the front wings. As you can see right there, I'm using an obscene amount of CA glue to attach a couple of custom made pieces on the front of each wing. Those will of course be sitting on the outside of each wing, and each has 3 spots for 3 little thrusters. Those were found in my collection of gribblies and glued in place with some CA glue after some light sanding. Sanding surfaces is very helpful when you're trying to combine some weird types of plastics together. And of course, as you can see, I made the same thing on both wings. Then I decided to add some tubing on the outside of each wing. The white material that you see right there is 2mm PVC tube, which works very well with CA glue and is super easy to bend. I glued the PVC tube with CA glue on the surface of the wing, but on some spots I've used some custom gribblies to create some connection points and segment the whole thing. Combining multiple curves and bends can be kinda tricky, so segmenting the whole thing is very helpful. Recently, a big friend of mine gave me this thin and soft aluminum wire, and I decided to throw some alongside the PVC tubing, and this right here was the result. Once I was done with the side thrusters on the front of each wing, I quickly installed a couple of smaller thrusters on the bottom of the spaceship, and the propulsion system of the spaceship is done. Now, as you can see, the cockpit sphere is divided right in the middle, and that meant that I had to attach it to the body of the spaceship, kind of crooked like this. Now, the challenge, of course, is that the pilot should be facing forward like this, and so I need to create a parallel line from the body inside of the sphere. Right now, of course, this bolt being right here, it works as an axle, and I'm thinking that if I keep like a marker perpendicular to this axle, I'll get a perfectly straight line on the inside of the sphere. Let's see if that will work. And as you just saw, it kinda did, and I had a somewhat parallel line on the inside of the cockpit to guide me on the next process. I decided to begin creating the inside of the cockpit by the pilot seat. So I went in my collection of gribblies looking for something, and I found a couple that kinda looked like one. Now, of course, these 2 gribblies had some extra features here and there that I really didn't need, and so I began a process of removing some shapes here and there just so I could combine these 2 pieces together. Now, initially I decided to go with CA to combine these 2 shapes together, but I quickly realized that for this type of plastic, CA is just not enough, and so I decided to reinforce it all with a piece of 2mm styrene on the bottom. And while I was there, I covered some holes here and there with some pieces of acrylic. The 2 pieces combined so well, and very quickly it was looking cool, but it still wasn't looking like a seat, and so I began adding some extra pieces and gribblies to make it look like one, like some acrylic shapes and of course some keycaps from dead laptops. There was also some very delicate Dremel work to remove some extra features here and there that were in my way. I kept going, looking into my collection for buttons with different shapes and sizes that fitted the first 2 initial gribblies. I came into some happy accidents where things fitted perfectly, but I also needed to change some features here and there in my Dremel tool, and eventually I got to this. Okay, so this is the primed seat, and isn't it the most uncomfortable seat ever? Yeah, so now I'll make a quick human skeleton, probably using some pieces of wood and some wire, and then I'll check if it sits nicely in here, if I need to change anything, and if everything is okay, I can glue this to the sphere, to the cockpit. Now, to make the human figure skeleton, I've used a bunch of different materials, beginning with some pieces of chopstick and wire. But for the torso, for instance, I went with a piece of acrylic that I shaped on my mini disc sander, and for the arms I went with some pieces of PVC tubing. Now, of course, this pilot is essentially an astronaut, and so on its face I glued a big plastic sphere to act like a helmet, and checking it against the seat, things were looking great. I could put the skeleton away and keep going with the detailing of the cockpit. Now, a couple of minutes ago I said that I was going to glue the seat inside of the cockpit, but that's just not a good idea. Instead, I decided to go with some fake Lego pieces to create an attachment point that would be very helpful on the painting process. From there, I went on a journey of adding some cool little details on the inside surface of the sphere. I added a couple of round pieces, a ton of tubing, and this right here was the result. It of course received a coat of primer and it was looking very good already. But at that point, a patron of mine gave me a very good idea. He told me to try to add some screens on the inside of the cockpit, and I thought it made so much sense. So I just went for it, as you can see, using a couple of laptop keyboard keycaps that were kinda glued back to back, added a few extra pieces here and there, and it is attached to the wall of the sphere, kinda sitting on a nice angle. On the top of the skeleton, I went with the epoxy putty, which is somewhat easy to sculpt. Now the challenge, of course, is to get the anatomy right, and I'm also working on his uniform or maybe astronaut suit without too much planning, so yeah, I'm kinda improvising my way right here. Now this is a type of situation where I think my weaknesses really show up. I'm not constantly making human figures. Right here in this channel, I'm mostly sticking to the hard surface things which I love, so when I'm facing a project that pretty much requires a human figure, it can be quite challenging. I don't feel that I have the techniques, the skills, or the tools for the job, and so this means that it can take much longer than it should. Long story short, I wasn't able to finish the pilot this week, and that will have to come in the next episode. As always, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and please consider supporting the channel on Patreon, it really helps. And of course, thanks for watching.